Good evening. My name is Chris Bowick, and you're listening to Lucid Learning, a show geared towards listening to podcasts while you're trying to sleep. I'll be taking a deep dive into the great resource that we all love, Wikipedia. Starting with a topic I'm personally interested in, and then going down the rabbit hole of Wikipedia. Because of the way Wikipedia works, this podcast is going to cover a wide range of topics. We may start with largemouth bass fishing. By the end of the episode, we're reading about the fall of Rome. If you'd like to send a topic in that you'd like me to start with, you can email me at lucidlearningpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find all of these episodes on YouTube. I understand that some podcast apps may have ads that are a lot louder than the podcast you're listening to. So I encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel titled Lucid Learning Podcast. I also encourage you to enable dark theme on YouTube if you're using this podcast for its intended purpose of helping you fall asleep. Also, I think the idea of reviews on this podcast saying this podcast is so boring, 5 stars, is hilarious. So please give feedback, not only because it's hilarious, but also let me know what I can improve upon. So maybe you'll listen to this podcast for other reasons than just falling asleep, but be warned, this podcast will be boring. This show will make your high school history teacher look like George Carlin. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I think the most appropriate first topic should be about lucid dreaming, which I've always thought was fascinating anyways. So starting off, a lucid dream is a dream during which the dreamer is aware that they are dreaming. During a lucid dream, the dreamer may gain some amount of control over the dream characters, narrative, and environment. However, this is not actually necessary for a dream to be described as lucid. Lucid dreaming has been studied and reported for many years. Prominent figures from ancient to modern times have been fascinated by lucid dreams and have sought ways to better understand their causes and purpose. Many different theories have emerged as a result of scientific research on the subject and have been shown in pop culture. Further developments in psychological research have pointed to ways in which this form of dreaming may be utilized as a form of sleep therapy. So the etymology of it, the term lucid dream was coined by Dutch author and psychiatrist Frederick van Eden in his 1913 article, A Study of Dreams. Though depictions of dreamers being aware that they're dreaming predates the actual term. Well, obviously, right. That was just when they coined the term. So Eden studied his personal dreams since 1896. So wow, for 17 years, he was writing down his dreams and studying them. So he wrote down the dreams that seemed most important to him. And out of all of these dreams, 352 were what is known as lucid dreams. He created different names for the different types of dreams he experienced, each name being created from the data he had collected. He named 7 different types of dreams: initial dreams, pathological, ordinary dreaming, vivid dreaming, demonical, general dream sensations, and lucid dreaming. Frederick van Eden said the 7th type of dreaming, lucid dreaming, was the most interesting and worthy of the most careful observation of studies. Eden studied lucid dreaming between January 20th, 1898 and December 26th, 1912. While describing his state of dreaming, Eden said, "You are completely aware of your surroundings and are able to direct your actions freely, yet the sleep is stimulating and uninterrupted." And that would be amazing. I've tried actual lucid dreaming, and I didn't try very hard, but I just could never do it. There have been times, normally it's, as soon as I find out I'm dreaming, I wake up. and it just ruins it. Um, so, anyways, the history of it. So, in Eastern thought, cultivating the dreamer's ability to be aware that he or she is dreaming is central to both ancient Indian Hindu practice of yoga nidra. The common or the cultivation of such awareness was common practice among early Buddhists. Early references to the phenomenon are also found in ancient Greek writing. For example, the philosopher Aristotle wrote, "Often when one is asleep, there is something in consciousness which declares that when then presents itself as but a dream." Hmm. So Aristotle was a Greek philosopher and polymath during the classical period in ancient Greece. He was the founder of Lyceum and the Peripatetic school of philosophy and Aristotelian tradition. Along with his teacher Plato, he has been called the father of Western philosophy. Western philosophy refers to the philosophical thought and work of the Western world. Historically, the term refers to the philosophical thinking of Western culture, beginning with Greek philosophy of the pre-Socrates such as Thales and Pythagoras, and eventually covering a large area of the globe. The word philosophy itself originated from the ancient Greek, literally the love of wisdom. The scope of philosophy in the ancient understanding and the writings of at least some of the ancient philosophers were all intellectual endeavors. This included the problems of philosophy as they are understood today, but it also included many other disciplines, such as pure mathematics and natural sciences, such as physics, astronomy, and biology. So let's read about existentialism. And existentialism is a term applied to the work of a number of late 19th and 20th century philosophers who, despite profound doctrinal differences, shared the belief that philosophical thinking begins with the human subject, not merely the thinking subject, but the acting, feeling, living human individual. In existentialism, the individual's starting point is characterized by what has been called the existential attitude, or a sense of disorientation and confusion in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world. Many existentialists have also regarded traditional, systematic, or academic philosophy, in both style and content, as too abstract and remote from concrete human experience. Although they did not use the term in the 19th century, philosophers Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche are widely regarded as the fathers of existentialism. Their influence, however, has extended beyond existential thought. So, German idealism emerged in Germany in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. It developed out of the work of Immanuel Kant in the 1780s and 1790s. Transcendental idealism, advocated by Immanuel Kant, is the view that there are limits on what can be understood, since there is much that cannot be brought under the conditions of objective judgment. Kant wrote his Critique of Pure Reason in an attempt to reconcile the conflicting approaches of rationalism and empiricism and to establish a new groundwork for studying metaphysics. Although Kant held that objective knowledge of the world required the mind to impose a conceptual or categorical framework on the stream of pure sensory data, a framework including space and time themselves, He maintained that things in themselves existed independently of human perception and judgments. He was therefore not an idealist in any simple sense. And the thing in itself is, it would be objects as they are independent of observation. The concept led to much controversy among philosophers. So, in his doctrine of transcendental idealism, Kant argued the sum of all objects, the empirical world, is a complex of appearances whose existence and connection occur only in our representation. Kant introduces the thing in itself as follows: as we indeed, rightly considering objects of sense as mere appearances, confess thereby that they are based upon a thing in itself, though we know not this thing as it is in itself, but only know its appearances, the way in which our senses are affected by this unknown something. And he got a lot of criticism for this. F.H. Jacobi was the first to criticize the concept of a thing in itself with the expression, "I could not enter into the system without the assumption of the concept of thing in itself, and, on the other hand, I could not remain in it with this concept." So, Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi was an influential German philosopher, literary figure, and socialite. He is notable for popularizing nihilism, a term coined by Obereit in 1787, and promoting it as the prime fault of Enlightenment thought, particularly in the philosopher's systems. So nihilism is the point of view that suspends belief in any or all general aspects of human life which are culturally accepted. Most commonly, nihilism is presented in the form of existential nihilism, which argues that life is without objective meaning, purpose, or intrinsic value. Moral nihilists assert that morality does not exist at all. So nihilism may also take epistemological, ontological, or metaphysical forms, meaning respectfully that in some aspect knowledge is not possible or reality does not actually exist. So the term is sometimes used in association with animi to explain the general mood or the mood of despair at a perceived pointlessness of existence that one may develop upon realizing that there are no necessary norms, rules, or laws. Nihilism has also been described as conspicuous in or constitutive of certain historical periods. For example, Jean Baudrillard and others have called postmodernity a nihilistic epoch, and some religious theologians and figures of religious authority have asserted that postmodern, oh my goodness, and many aspects of modernity, who knows? But they say that it represents a rejection of theism, and that such rejection of theistic doctrine entails nihilism. So metaphysical nihilism is the philosophical theory that positions that concrete objects and physical constructs might not exist in the possible world, or that even if there exist possible worlds that contain some concrete objects, there's at least one that contains only abstract objects. Extreme metaphysical nihilism is commonly defined as the belief that nothing exists as a correspondent component of the self-efficient world. The American Heritage Medical Dictionary defines one form of nihilism as an extreme form of skepticism that denies all existence. A similar skepticism concerning the concrete world can be found in solipsism. However, despite the fact that both deny the certainty of objects' true existence, the nihilist would deny the existence of self, whereas the solipsist would affirm it. Both these positions are considered forms of anti-realism. So, existential nihilism is the belief that life has no intrinsic meaning or value. With respect to the universe, existential nihilism posits that a single human, or even the entire human species, is insignificant, without purpose, and unlikely to change in the totality of existence. The meaningless or meaning of life is largely explored in the philosophical school of existentialism. Moral nihilism, also known as ethical nihilism, is the meta-ethical view that there is no morality whatsoever. Therefore, no action is preferable to another. For example, a moral nihilist would say that killing someone for whatever reason is neither right nor wrong. Wow. So for them, they basically believe it doesn't matter. There is no moral high ground. There's no morality. That's wild. Other nihilists may argue not that there is no morality, but that if it does exist, it is a human construction and thus artificial, wherein any and all meaning is relative for different possible outcomes. As an example, if someone kills someone else, such a nihilist might argue that killing is not inherently a bad thing or bad independently from our moral beliefs because of the way morality is constructed as some rudimentary dichotomy. What is said to be a bad thing is given a higher negative weighting than what is called good. As a result, killing the individual was bad because it did not let the individual live, which was arbitrarily given a positive weighting. In this way, such a nihilist believes that all moral claims are void of any objective truth value. An alternative scholarly perspective is that moral nihilism is a morality in itself. Cooper writes, in the widest sense of the word morality, moral nihilism is a morality. Wow, that's wild. So political nihilism follows the characteristic nihilistic rejection of non-rationalized or non-proven assertions. In this case, the necessity of the most fundamental social and political structures, such as government, family, and law, an influential analysis of political nihilism is presented by Leo Strauss. So the Russian nihilist movement was a Russian trend in the 1860s that rejected all authority. After the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881, the nihilists gained a reputation throughout Europe as proponents of the use of violence for political change. The nihilists expressed anger at what they described as the abusive nature of the Eastern Orthodox Church and of the Tsarist monarchy, and at the domination of the Russian economy by the aristocracy. Although the term nihilism was coined by F. H. Jacobi, its widespread usage began with the 1862 novel Fathers and Sons by the Russian author Ivan Turgenev. The main character of the novel, who describes himself as a nihilist, wants to educate the people. The Go to the People, Be the People campaign reached its height in the 1870s, during which underground groups such as Circle of Tchaikovsky, The People's Will, and the Land of Liberty formed. The Circle of Tchaikovsky was a Russian literary society for self-education and a revolutionary organization of the Narodniks in the early 1870s. It was named after Nikolai Tchaikovsky, one of its prominent members. So the intelligentsia of mid-19th century Tsarist Russia was they were dissatisfied with what they saw as social stagnation of the nation and had begun to demand reform. Their attitude was notably characterized by novelist Ivan Turgenev's nihilism. The peak of this social activism gave rise to a number of secret organizations. The Circle was founded in St. Petersburg during student unrest in 1868 to 1869 as a group opposed to the reckless violence of Sergei Nechayev, a literary society for self-education within the Medical Surgical Academy was the heart of the organization, the initial purpose of which was to share books and knowledge that had been banned in the Russian Empire. It included students Mark Nathanson, V. M. Alexandrov, and Anatoly Serdyukov, who were joined by Nikolai Tchaikovsky and Feofan Lermontov. Besides self-education, the Circle's main tasks were to unite students of Petersburg and other cities and conduct propaganda among workers and peasants with the purpose of fomenting a social revolution. The Tchaikovsky set higher moral standards for their members in the face of Nechaev's unscrupulousness. They had a negative attitude towards struggle for political freedoms, which, in their view, were only advantageous to the arising Russian bourgeoisie. These principles were formulated in the Program for the Circles of Self-Education and Practical Activity put together by the Tchaikovsky in the late 1870, early 1871. One of the first tasks of Tchaikovsky was to organize the printing, publishing, and distribution of scientific and revolutionary literature. These literary works included the first volume of Das Kapital by Karl Marx and books by others, including Nikolai Chernyshevsky. Wow, a lot of Nikolais. In the summer of 1871, the Circle of Nathanson merged with a female self-education circle. Soon they were joined by Peter Kropotkin, Leonid Shishko, and others. The Central Petersburg Circle comprised around 60 people, although the Tchaikovsky numbered around 100 participants. In 1872, the Tchaikovsky began organizing circles of workers with the purpose of training propagandists for work in the countryside. These activities were most successful in Petersburg and Odessa, where the circles comprised around 400 workers. Some of these workers would later become the founders of the first proletarian organizations, such as the Workers' Union of Southern Russia and the Northern Union of Russian Workers. The results of this propaganda work were summarized in a report by Peter Kropotkin, which would be discussed in the Petersburg Circle of the Tchaikovsky in late 1873. So the proletariat is the class of wage earners in an economic society whose only possession of significant material value is their labor power, or how much work they can do. A member of such a class is a proletarian. Marxist theory considers the proletariat to be oppressed by capitalism and the wage system. This oppression gives the proletariat common economic and political interests that transcend national boundaries. These common interests put the proletariat in a position to unite and take power from the capitalist class, in order to create a communist society free from class distinctions. So the proletarii constituted a social class of Roman citizens owning little or no property. The origin of the name is presumably linked with the census, which Roman authorities conducted every 5 years to produce a register of citizens and their property from which their military duties and voting privileges can be determined. For citizens with property valued 11,000, it's spelled asses. I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced, but for citizens with property valued 11,000 asses or less, which was below the lowest census for military service, their children were listed instead of their property. Hence the name proletarius, or the one who produces offspring. The only contribution of a proletarius to the Roman society was seen in his ability to raise children, the future Roman citizens who can colonize new territories conquered by the Roman Republic and later by the Roman Empire. The citizens who had no property of significance were called capitae censi because they were persons registered not as to their property, but simply as to their existence as living individuals, primarily as heads of a family. Although included in one of the 5 support centuri of Comitia Centuriata, or the Centuriate Assembly, proletarii were largely deprived of their voting rights due to their low social status caused by their lack of even the minimum property required for the lowest class, and a class-based hierarchy of the Centuriate Assembly. The late Roman historians, such as Livy, not without some uncertainty, understood the Centuriate Assembly to be one of 3 forms of popular assembly of early Rome composed of centuri, the voting units whose members represented a class of citizens according to the value of their property. This assembly, which usually met on Campus Martius to discuss public policy issues, was also used as a means of designating military duties demanded of Roman citizens. One of the reconstructions of the Centuriate Assembly features 18 centuri of cavalry and 100 centuri of infantry divided into 5 classes by wealth, plus 5 centuri of support personnel called adsudui. The top infantry class assembled with full arm and armor. The next 2 classes brought arms and armor, but less and lesser. The 4th class only spears, and the 5th slings. In voting, the cavalry and top infantry class were enough to decide an issue, as voting started at the top. An issue might be decided before the lower class even voted. After the closing of the Second Punic War, a series of subsequent wars, including the Jugurthan War and various conflicts in Macedonia and Asia, resulted in a significant reduction in the number of Roman family farmers. The effect was therefore that the Roman Republic experienced a shortage of people whose property qualified them to perform the citizenry's military duty to Rome. So the Second Punic War, also referred to as the Hannibalic War, and by the Romans, the war against Hannibal, was the second of 3 Punic Wars between the Roman Republic and Carthage, with the participation of Macedonia and Syracuse and Numidian and Iberian forces on both sides. It was one of the deadliest human conflicts of ancient times, fought across the entire Western Mediterranean region for 17 years, and regarded by Livy as the greatest war in history. It was waged with unparalleled resources, skill, and hatred. It saw hundreds of thousands killed, some of the most lethal battles in military history, the destruction of cities, and massacres of enslavements of civilian populations and prisoners of war by both sides. The war began with the Carthaginian general Hannibal's conquest of the pro-Roman Iberian city of Saguntum in 219 BC, prompting a Roman declaration of war on Carthage in the spring of 218. Hannibal surprised the Romans by marching his army overland from Iberia to cross the Alps and invade Roman Italy, followed by his reinforcement by Gallic allies and crushing victories over Roman armies at the battles of Trebia in 218 and Lake Trasimene in 217, moving to southern Italy in 216. At the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal annihilated the largest army the Romans had ever assembled. After the death or imprisonment of 130,000 Roman troops in 2 years, 40% of Rome's Italian allies defected to Carthage, giving it control over most of southern Italy. As Syracuse and Macedonia joined the Carthaginian side after Cannae, the conflict spread to Sicily and triggered the First Macedonian War in Greece. From 215 to 210, the Carthaginian army and navy launched repeated amphibious assaults to capture Roman Sicily and Sardinia, but were ultimately repulsed. Against Hannibal's skill on the battlefield, the five-time consul Fabius Maximus organized a war of attrition against him. While fighting his allies and the other Carthaginian generals, Roman armies slowly captured most of the cities that had joined Carthage and defeated a Carthaginian attempt to reinforce Hannibal at Metaurus in 207. Southern Italy was devastated by the combatants, with hundreds of thousands of civilians killed or enslaved. In Iberia, which served as a major source of silver and manpower for the Carthaginian army, Roman operations were led by members of the Cornelii Scipiones. In 209, Publius Cornelius Scipio captured Carthago Nova, then won a streak of great victories, notably at Ilipa in 206, which permanently ended Carthaginian rule in Iberia. He invaded Carthaginian Africa in 204, inflicting two severe defeats on Carthage and her allies at Utica and the Great Plains that compelled the Carthaginian Senate to recall Hannibal's army from Italy. The final engagement between Scipio and Hannibal took place at Zama in Africa in 202 and resulted in Hannibal's defeat and the imposition of harsh peace conditions on the Punic city. As a result, Carthage ceased to be a great power and to become a Roman client state until its final destruction by Scipio Aemilianus in 146 BC during the Third Punic War. The Second Punic War overthrew the established balance of power of the ancient world, and Rome rose to become the dominant power for the next 600 years. So I want to read about the aftermath a little bit. So Carthage lost Hispania forever, and Rome firmly established her power there over large areas. Rome imposed a war indemnity of 10,000 silver talents, limited the Carthaginian navy to 10 ships, and it has in parentheses to ward off pirates. So they let them keep 10 ships for the sole purpose to ward off pirates, and that's it. And they forbade Carthage from raising an army without Roman permission. The Numidians took the opportunity to capture and plunder Carthaginian territory. Half a century later, when Carthage raised an army to defend itself from these incursions, Rome destroyed her in the Third Punic War. They're just trying to defend themselves. And Rome said, no, 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 not today. Rome, on the other hand, by her victory, had taken key steps towards what ultimately became her domination of the Mediterranean world. The end of the world did not meet with a universal welcome in Rome. When the Senate decided upon a peace treaty with Carthage, Quintus Cassius Metellus, a former consul, said he did not look upon the termination of the war as a blessing to Rome, since he feared that the Roman people would now sink back again into its former slumbers, from which it had been roused by the presence of Hannibal. Others, most notably Cato the Elder, feared that if Carthage was not completely destroyed, it would soon regain its power and pose new threats to Rome. He pressed for harsher peace conditions. Even after the peace, Cato insisted on the destruction of Carthage, ending all his speeches with "Carthage must be destroyed," even if they had nothing to do with Carthage. That's petty. That's petty. Every single speech. He could be given a speech on the homeless, but he ended every single speech with "Carthage must be destroyed." Man. Archaeology has discovered that the famous circular military harbor at Carthage, the Kothan, received a significant build-up during or after this war. Though shielded from external sight, it could house and quickly deploy up to 200 triremes. This appears a surprising development as, after the war, one of the terms of surrender restricted the Carthaginian fleet to only 10 triremes. One possible explanation, as has been pointed out by other Phoenician cities, privateers with warships played a significant role besides trade even when the Roman Empire was fully established and officially controlled all coasts. And a privateer is a private person or ship that engages in maritime warfare under a commission of war. So it's like a contractor for war. Since robbery under arms was a common aspect of seaborne trade, until the early 19th century, all merchant ships carried arms. A sovereign or delegated authority issued commissions, also referred to as a letter of marque, during wartime. The commission empowered the holder to carry on all forms of hostility permissible at sea by the usages of war. This included attacking foreign vessels and taking them as prizes, and taking prize crews as prisoner for exchange. Could you imagine if this was still a thing? I could just imagine some, just a good old boy in the Gulf of Mexico on a boat, just trying to take prisoners. That is insane. So, captured ships were subject to condemnation and sale under prize law, with the proceeds divided by percentage between the privateer sponsors, ship owners, captains, and crew. So, and prize law is it's a term used in admiralty law to refer to equipment, vehicles, vessels, and cargo captured during armed conflict. The most common use of prize in this sense is the capture of an enemy ship and her cargo as a prize of war. In the past, the capturing force would commonly be allotted a share of the worth of the captured prize. Nations often granted the letters of marque that would entitle private parties to capture enemy property, usually ships. Once the ship was secured on friendly territory, she would be made the subject of a prize case in rem proceeding in which the court determined the status of the condemned property and the manner in which the property was to be disposed of. And that's what's crazy, is that this wasn't pirates. These weren't people that were just doing this. Like, they had to go to court to determine the status. These people legally could just take ships, just take them over. That's different time. And there's actually a picture here on the Wikipedia page of a British ship capturing a French ship and towing it, and that was in 1795. So, like, America had already been formed, and they were still doing this. That is insane. At the outset, prize taking was all smash and grab, But by the 15th century, a body of guiding rules, the maritime law of nations, had begun to evolve. So, so by the 15th century was whenever they were actually making laws about how you could do this legally. Grotius's seminal treatise on international law, published in 1604, called Commentary on the Law of Prize and Booty. I'm a child. It was an advocate's brief justifying Dutch seizures of Spanish and Portuguese shipping. Grotius defends the practice of taking prizes as not merely traditional or customary, but just. His commentary points out that the etymology of the name of the Greek war god Ares was the verb to seize. That's wild. That the law of nations had deemed looting enemy property legal since the beginning of Western recorded history in Homeric times. Prize law fully developed between the 7 Years' War of 1756 to 63 and the American Civil War of 1861 to 65. This period largely coincides with the last century of fighting sail and includes the Napoleonic Wars, the American and French Revolutions, and America's quasi-war with France of the late 1790s. Much of the Anglo-American prize law derives from 18th century British precedents, in particular a compilation called the 1753 Report of the Law Officers, authored by William Murray, 1st Earl of Mansfield, said to be the most important exposition of prize law published in English, along with the subsequent High Court of Admiralty decisions of William Scott, Lord Stowell. American Justice, Joseph Story, the leading United States judicial authority on prize law, drew heavily on the 1753 report and Lord Stowell's decisions, as did Francis Upton, who wrote the last major American treatise on prize law. His was titled Maritime Warfare and Prize. While the Anglo-American common law case precedents are the most accessible descriptions of prize law, it is important to bear in mind that in prize cases, courts construe and apply international customs and usages, the law of nations, and not the laws or precedents of any one country. Fortunes in prize money were to be made at sea as vividly depicted in the novels of C.S. Forester and Patrick O'Brian. During the American Revolution, the combined American naval and privateering prizes totaled nearly $24 million. In the War of 1812, $45 million. Now, I wonder if that's gotta be like today's money, right? Maybe not. I wonder what that would be today. But such huge revenues were earned when $200 were a generous year's wage for a salary. Oh no, so that is their time. Wow. His share of a single prize could fetch 10 or 20 times his yearly pay, and taking 5 or 6 prizes in one voyage was common. So his yearly pay was nothing. That was just a little, yeah, I don't care about this. Wow. So with so much at stake, prize law attracted some of the greatest legal talents of the age, including John Adams, Joseph Story, Daniel Webster, Richard Henry Dana Jr., author of 2 Years Before the Mast. Prize cases were among the most complex of the time, as the disposition of vast sums turned on the fluid law of nations and difficult questions of jurisdictions and precedent. One of the earliest U.S. cases, for instance, that of the active, took fully 30 years to resolve jurisdictional disputes between state and federal authorities. A captured American privateer captain 20-year-old Gideon Olmsted shipped aboard the British sloop Active in Jamaica as an ordinary hand in an effort to get home. Olmsted organized a mutiny and commandeered the sloop, but as Olmsted's mutineers sailed their prize to America, a Pennsylvania privateer took the Active. Olmsted and the privateer disputed ownership of the prize, and in November 1778, a Philadelphia prize court jury came to a split verdict awarding each a share. Olmsted, with the assistance of then American General Benedict Arnold, appealed to the Continental Congress Prize Committee, which reversed the Philadelphia jury verdict and awarded the whole prize to Olmsted, which, reading about it, I feel like that's fair, right? Like finders keepers, he had it first. This other guy just came in and stole it from him, but he was stealing from his own ship, right? Because he took the British ship. Olmsted took the British ship. Oh man, that was the case that took 30 years. Wow. So Olmsted pursued the case for decades until he won in a U.S. Supreme Court case in 1809, which Justice Stanley Matthews later called the first case in which the supremacy of the Constitution was enforced by judicial tribunals against the assertion of state authority. Wow. So, as far as the commission goes, although the letters of marque and reprisal were sometimes issued before a formal declaration of war, as happened during the American Revolution, when the rebelling colonies of Massachusetts, Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania all granted letters of marque months before the Continental Congress's official Declaration of Independence of July 1776. By the turn of the 19th century, it was generally accepted that a sovereign government first had to declare war. And so before that, it was, I guess they were just, a war is going to happen, so you can go ahead and get your money, type thing. And then the turn of the 19th century, the way that it's worded, it sounds like it's like it's an unwritten rule, basically. So the existence of war between nations terminates all legal commercial intercourse between their citizens or subjects, wrote Francis Upton in Maritime Warfare and Prize, and he continues to say, since trade and commerce presuppose the existence of civil contracts and recourse to judicial tribunals, and this is necessarily incompatible with a state of war. And indeed, each citizen of a nation is at war with every citizen of the enemy, which imposes a duty on every citizen to attack the enemy and seize his property, though by established custom this right is restricted to such only as are the commissioned instruments of the government. The formal commission bestowed upon a naval vessel and the letter of marque and reprisal granted to private merchant vessels, converting them into naval auxiliaries, qualified them to take enemy property as the armed hands of their sovereign and to share in the proceeds. Oh, and there's a section here I've got to read about, I guess, how they would capture the prize. Right, so when a privateer or naval vessel spotted a tempting vessel, whatever flag she flew, or often enough flying none at all, they gave chase. Sailors under false colors was a common ruse both for predator and prey. The convention was a vessel must hoist her true colors before firing the first shot. And I knew that was a thing, right? So I always thought about, why not just fly a different flag? And it looks like, from what it's saying, you can do that, but as soon as you fire a shot, you better have the right flag up. And it says that firing under a false flag could cost dearly in prize court proceedings, even result in restitution to the captured vessel's owner. So if you are, an American ship or really an American civilian, and you decide to take a British ship during the Revolutionary War, and you're flying their flag, right? You're flying the British flag, and you fire that shot, the American court systems, it says at least it could result in them telling you to pay them back, the enemy, all because you were flying a false flag. That's crazy. So often a single cannon shot across the bow was enough to persuade the prey to heave to, which I think that means, to surrender, basically, right? Oh, okay. So in sailing, heaving to is a way of slowing a sailboat's forward progress, as well as fixing the helm and sail positions so that the boat does not have to be steered. It is commonly used for a break. This may be to wait for the tide before proceeding or to wait out a strong or contrary wind. So, normally they would shoot a single cannon shot and the prey would heave to, but sometimes brutal hours and even days of cannonading ensued. Uh, Cannonading sounds like they're just going to be really nice to each other. But cannonading ensued, along with boarding and hand-to-hand fighting with cutlasses, pistols, and boarding spikes. No matter how furious and bloody the battle, once it was over, the victors had to collect themselves, put aside anger, and exercise forbearance, treating captives with courtesy and civility to the degree prudence allowed. Officers restrained the crew to prevent pillaging defeated adversaries or pilfering the cargo known as breaking bulk. Francis Upton's treatise on maritime warfare cautioned embezzlements of the cargo seized, or acts personally violent, or injuries perpetrated upon the captured crew, or improperly separating them from the prize vessel, or not producing them for examination before the prize court, or other torts injurious to the rights and healths of the prisoners, may render the arrest of the vessel or cargo as prize defeasible, and also subject the tortfeasor for damages therefor. So again, if you're too mean to the captured, like physically violent, the court system may say, you're liable for that damage. That's so funny to think about. That I can go capture this ship and these people, they can be my prisoners legally, but then also because it's a legal thing, now there are stipulations to it. So taking the prize before a prize court might be impractical for any number of reasons, like bad weather, shortage of prize crew, dwindling water and provisions, or the proximity of an overpowering enemy force, in which case a vessel might be ransomed. That is, instead of destroying her on the spot, as was their prerogative, the privateer or naval officer would accept a scrip in form of an IOU for an agreed sum as ransom from the ship's master. On land, this would be extortion, and the promise to pay unenforceable in court, but at sea it was acceptable practice, and the IOUs were negotiable instruments. Wow. Okay, I think this is a good spot to go ahead and end this episode. Hopefully, you're not even awake anymore if you're using this the way that I intend it to be used. And if so, then I've served my purpose. We went from lucid dreaming all the way to prize law in this episode, which is exactly how I want this to be. I did notice at the end, maybe it was just me while I was talking, but I felt like I got a little too excited for something that I'm supposed to be bored about. Uh, so I'll try to see what I can do about that. Um, don't forget to leave a review and subscribe for future episodes. You can email me at lucidlearningpodcast@gmail.com. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, Lucid Learning Podcast. My name is Chris Bowick, and thank you for listening to Lucid Learning. Good night.